Welcome back in, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for listening. It's Gridiron 360. It's Dave and Bill, and we are talking 2020 NFL draft prospects from the Southeastern Conference. You got a broken one there, buddy. Bah! So we've gone through every position group in the SEC, specifically because this is probably the deepest conference, which is why we went through it by position group rather than top 10, 20 guys. And we are wrapping up with the defensive side of the ball and your defensive backs. We did safeties, so now we go to the cornerbacks. We're going to start this thing off and rip off really the top 4 cornerbacks in the SEC for the draft. We'll talk a little bit about them, and then we'll dive into another. We'll talk maybe another 2 guys in another cast and drop the other 3 on top of that, all eligible from the SEC. Let's get it rolling, my friend.
All right.
The number 1 guy they have in the SEC at cornerback listed is from the University of Florida, the Gators. I was waiting for that. From Miami, Florida, junior, Mr. C.J. Henderson. He is 6'1", 204. 31 and 5/8 inch arms, 9-inch hands, ran a stunning 40 at the combine with a 4.39. Pretty nice. Threw up 20 reps on the bench.
Yep.
That's something else because we saw some linebackers that couldn't even get to 20. This guy, he's a good player, man. Let me pull up some of my notes on Mr. Fulton, and I'll let you talk a little bit about him. I've watched some tape on
Fulton, you mean Mr. Henderson?
Sorry, Mr. Henderson.
Mr. Hendershot?
Mr. Fulton will come later. Mr. Henderson from Florida. A couple things I like about this guy is he's got great eyes, keeps his eyes on the ball. He's a really good blitzer off the edge. When they call for a corner blitz, he comes up, disguises it well in my mind, and is able to go from 0 to 60 in no time. I mean, bang. He comes off the line, and he's shooting right in there, taking a great angle at the quarterback. Had some, obviously posted some sacks from the corner position in his career, which is great. He's a fast guy. Doesn't ever seem to give up on the play. I saw one highlight, and I can't remember if it was this year. It was against the University of Tennessee, and I believe Pope is one of their tight ends, and he catches a ball out in like the left flat and is just wide open, just scampering all the way downfield. There is nobody around him. And right when he's about to cross the goal line, into the picture comes C.J. Henderson and, makes a great tackle on the guy. But on top of that, he's great with his hands, and he jars the ball loose at like the half-yard line and bounces in through the end zone for a touchback. Again, great at using his hands, especially when the ball is in the receiver's hands. Okay? I saw a lot of plays from this kid when the wide receiver caught the ball, him jarring it loose, having a knack for having his hands in the right place, whether it makes it an incomplete or even jarring it loose for a fumble. So those are some of the great things I see about Henderson. Obviously a pretty good size, 6'1", not the tallest of these 4, but definitely tall for a corner, which is kind of where the NFL is going.
Yeah, here's the thing with corners that I always look at, and whether this is fair or not, and is not, admittedly, is not always reliable, but I look at what kind of fronts they've got, how strong they are on the defensive line in particular. If there's one thing you can do, you can expose almost in an unfair way a poor corner with a poor pass rush, but yet you can hide marginal, medium, coverage skills with a good pass rush.
Yep.
And so I kind of look at that and always look at, now you think about Florida. Florida was expected to have an exceptional defensive front. The front 7 was supposed to be very good. Yep. And
we talked about 2 guys, I think, in the D-line.
Yeah,
for this
Zuniga and Greenard.
Yeah,
Grenard. So, you look at it, and now those guys, but neither, like Zuniga, as an example, was expected to be the man and really got outplayed by Grenard. So I really, as good as I thought the front was for Florida, this kid got put in a lot of Got put in a lot of tough positions. Again, think about this as a team that has to play LSU. You know, the SEC East isn't as strong, but it did get tested against LSU. He's got really everything. Sometimes you look, I think the number's really about 6'1", anything over like probably about like the 195, but really over 200 pounds. You start looking at guys that can play in the press coverage, and question becomes in some of the press coverage is, are these guys more of like a cover two? Are they more of a zone corner, or can they run down the field with guys? This is a guy that can do both. So he's got the physicality. He can play and press, but he can chase you downfield. I mean, you look at his pass breakups. You mentioned that. His ability to jar. He can be physical at the point of attack. So this is kind of a kid that's got it all. And what I like about him was, you know, it's tough to step on the scene. As much as Florida's team has been in a little bit of disarray until recently, as a freshman, he came onto the scene and he was putting up numbers. He constantly put up numbers. You noticed him out in the field. You know, there's always, I think some of the things I get concerned about is how well Florida's defenses were coached, particularly early on in his career. But he progressed. I mean, Grantham was who he was with. You know, near
Grantham
the
at DC.
and he's good. He's a good coach. He understands that, and I think he kind of got the most out of him. He made a comment that he thought this was the best corner he'd ever coached. I mean, Grantham, where has he been? He's been at Georgia. I'm trying to think of
Alabama.
Could have been. Yeah, I think so. Like he's been in some big time programs. I just think this kid actually
Louisville. I think he might have been there.
Yeah, even though he's got you know he's you know got some prototypical size, and you know we could always talk about the great things about him. I mean, it says something to me about a kid that can come in and produce as a freshman, because if there's one thing that Florida schools will always have, maybe not always the best and certainly not always the most well coached, but between Miami, Florida State in particular, and Florida in particular, they've got athletes.
Speed. I mean, you know, this kid's out of Miami. And, you know, Florida is one of the top states in the country in terms of recruiting, especially what you said, athletes.
Yeah. So
special players, fast players. You mentioned it. This past year, he had 33 tackles, 3 for loss, 11 pass breakups. That's great stuff. He did only play 9 games this season. He had a little bit of an ankle injury.
Yep.
But I don't think that's going to necessarily, you know, cause any problems for this draft. He's stud, dude. You know, well, one thing is I did see him on a couple plays that I watched seem a little unbalanced if he wasn't turned the right way on a receiver and had to transition, turning his body a different way. Just seemed a little upright and awkward, so maybe that's something to work on. But, I mean, you know, again, we're just trying to nitpick a little bit. This guy is one of the top corners in the draft, and quite frankly, with the stuff we had said in our little mock draft about Okudah, you know, you might even think he could go before him.
Yeah, I almost kind of wonder. It's surprising to me on this team that he had so many opportunities. You know, usually you talk about guys, and we're going to talk a little bit about LSU, but I'll give an example of somebody who's not coming into the draft this year. You know, you talk about a guy like Stingley, who is already getting some high comparisons in his skill set. Well, he was a freshman this year, and he came in, and they picked on him because obviously you had a skilled guy like Christian Fulton, who we'll talk about in a minute, on the other side, and then all of a sudden teams realized maybe this isn't the guy to pick on, and then went after Christian Fulton. So Christian Fulton got a little more action this year. This is a guy that, even though as good as he's played and he's lived up to it, they've gone at him a bit, you know, like
they have, and you're right. And I saw a lot of it. One of the games I was watching, I can't remember which one it was. They didn't even throw the balls. It might have been, I can't remember if it was Alabama or not, but they hardly threw the ball Stingley's way, and that's freshman.
Yeah.
But they were throwing it Fulton's way, testing it, and he was doing a great job. That's the big thing, is like, even though they might have been. They might have feared throwing the ball Stingley's way more, and that was the more sure bet, they thought. I think different. I thought this kid stepped up and played exceptionally well.
Yeah. I don't really know what that means. I'm not trying to insinuate anything. It's just, you know, you see a guy like, I can tell you, I watched Ohio State games, and mind you, they had a tremendous pass rush, but they really tried to stay away from Okudah.
Yeah.
Like it's just one of those things, and that's usually high praise for a corner when they stay away from him. What I like about this though is even though they did attack him, this kid was up to it. He was definitely up to it. C.J. Anderson was all about it. He could end up. He is not obviously thought of as the number one corner in coming out right now. Okudah is by widely considered a top 5 pick. Not sure that'll really play out. We'll see. But I like this kid. I like his game. I hate the colors he wears, but I love the way he plays.
I know. And listen, in today's day and age, cornerback is a very valuable position. So I would anticipate this guy being gone in round 1. Let's move on to the next guy. No, not him. Let's see. A senior from Gaithersburg, Maryland. I actually lived there for like a couple years when I was like 3-4 years old in Gaithersburg, Maryland. Yeah. Alabama cornerback Trayvon Diggs, 6'1", 205, 32 3/4 inch arms, 9 3/8 inch hands. Let's see, I don't have any stats in terms of combine, but I'll tell you a little bit about what I got on him, then let you rip. This is a ball hawk. This guy is a ball hawk, especially when the ball's in the air. Loves to go up and make it.
Well, when the ball's not in the air, can he really hawk it?
What I mean is when the ball's in the air, even though he might not be as tall as some receivers, and 6'1" is pretty tall, but if you get like most receivers are 6'2" and higher unless they're in the slot. If they're playing outside on the corner, they're probably a little bit taller. That doesn't matter to him. This kid knows how to play the ball, go up, and really make it a contested catch every single time the ball's going his receiver's way. Bats a lot of balls down, much like Henderson. He has, what I like is he has good contact with his wide receivers during the route. So when they release, he has good hand, he keeps a hand or hands on, not PI, but keeps the hand like on the receiver, keeps that contact distance while he's running the route so that he never really loses yards on the guy and leaves him wide open. This guy's aggressive. I mean, aggressive as hell, and why not? He's a cornerback. He's a secondary guy from Alabama. We talked about it. Saban. That's his forte. Is the defense and especially in the secondary. But his guy is aggressive as hell. And I think this was last year against Tennessee where they fumbled the ball. They were driving and they were really on Bama's 2. They run a play, the ball's fumbled into the end zone. My man picks it up from the end zone, then proceeds to run 100-plus yards back for a touchdown. So aggressive, versatile. There were, I think, early in his career at Bama, he was brought in on some offensive plays, end arounds and such like.
Well, he was an offensive player. He was actually recruited as an offensive player.
He was.
I understand you may have heard the name Diggs before. His older brother is who?
Is Stephon.
Yeah, and if you'll remember, Stephon Diggs, I think, if I remember correctly, was the number 1 receiver in coming out of high school. And he went to the University of Maryland, and that was kind of a shock because he was in on big programs. So this kid,
he was, if it's his brother, I mean, they're from Maryland, so that makes sense.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. No, it is his brother. It is his brother.
Okay.
But the point is, this is a guy that played offense, and here you go. You got what I like about him is, in 2017, he transitioned into a full-time defensive player. So think about this. So Saban wants to pull him into probably what I would consider his most cherished unit, given that he's a defensive-minded guy, he's a secondaries coach. That's his background. Sees something in this kid and brings him in. I like the transition from receiver to D-back. Generally, a little bit better hands.
Right.
Probably not the greatest hands, or he probably would have stuck at receiver. But still, if you think about it, that's kind of usually the flaw of what makes a guy a cornerback is that he can't really catch the ball. This guy's got some hands on him. But I think the other important part of this is it's the fact he had an injury in 2018 and missed some of the season there.
Yep.
I mean, you think about transitioning
He had a
transitioning.
broken foot.
Yeah, transitioning on a team is hard enough. Transitioning at Alabama, that's pretty much 3 deep
Yeah,
in
you
every
better-
position
you-
every
yeah, you-
year.
Doesn't take much to lose your starting job.
Yeah, like that's a risk, and it's a risk that not only did he make pay off, but he made it pay off quickly and still had some, some time missed. Obviously first season transitioning out, second season, plays well, third season loses time, and then gets into 2019. Again, I go back to whether he had a good D line or not to kind of determine did it hide him, and I'd say this is probably one of the weakest defensive fronts I've seen Alabama have in a
Right.
while. And granted, there's a little bit of hyperbole in that, given the fact that
Compared to other
Alabama's
teams,
pretty
they're
awesome.
Still awesome, but
But
for
it-
Alabama.
But it matters, and for a team like this to show out like that, and I mean, again, remember, this is a team that played against an LSU offense. I mean, the offenses were way more prolific than they've been in the SEC in a long time, and really,
So had to
he
go to
showed
work,
up.
man.
Yeah,
had
he
to go
showed
to
up.
work. Let's
That's
see.
why I love him.
This last year, he posted 37 tackles, 2 fumble recoveries. Again, I talked about that 100-yard score. He led the team with that 8 pass breakups. He intercepted 3 passes. This is a guy that garners punt return duties for the team once they get the opposing team's offense into a punting situation. He also is on the kickoff team, and he's real fast, really good, hits well. So not that that's going to be his duty. In fact, I don't know if he's drafted as high as he will be, because I think he too could go in the first round. If they'll even bother messing with putting him on a kickoff team. Punt return, he could do. But, we talk a lot about special teams being a spot that guys can earn their role. I don't even think you'll need to go there with him. This
No,
guy can hop right on the field and get rolling.
I think where he's going to get drafted it's going to give him an instant opportunity to start. And so I think he's good. He's probably a little bit more of a press cover, playing in the short field. Gets a little bit more support over the top since, he doesn't run as much. I know that's one of the things they said about him. I can see that, but a lot of teams are playing that right now. And that ability to do that, you're not sending a majority of the teams are not sending their number 1 corner, for that matter, much less their number 2 corner, running straight down the field with the best wide receivers. It's just not common. And when you do, you're getting help over the top. So, this is a guy I think he's got what you need. I think this kid's a real first rounder. I would be shocked if he gets out of the first round.
Yep. All right, we'll move on to the next guy from the national champion Louisiana State University Tigers. A gentleman from New Orleans, Louisiana, a senior, Christian Fulton. 6 foot, $197, 30 5/8 inch arms, 9 1/8 hands. Ran a 4.46 40 at the combine. Put up a 35.5 inch vertical and 123 inch broad. So he may be smaller, but he's got some hops. This is. Am I looking at the right guy? I am not. Am I? My computer is. No, I am. Sorry, my computer is jacked up. So. But yeah, I'm on the right guy, Mr. Fulton. So, let's see. This past year, he started all 15 games. He had 38 stops, 38 tackles, 1 for loss, a pick. Had a team high 14 pass breakups. Now, he did have an issue earlier on in his career. Was suspended for a marijuana violation.
It was a big hit he was supposed to receive.
Yep.
He was supposed to get 2 years.
Yep, but he was reinstated. That was 2017. Was reinstated in 2018, and he was able to start 10 games that year in 2018. So definitely got better his senior year. You saw a lot of this guy this year. We just talked about Derek Stingley on the other side, the amazing freshman, and how a lot of teams were throwing away from him and throwing towards Fulton, and he stepped up. He
did.
Again, a guy with great eyes on the ball. He keeps his eyes on the ball very well, especially when he's called to cover in a zone coverage. phenomenal keeping his eyes on the quarterback and on the ball. And on top of that, especially I feel like in the zone coverage I saw him in, he's one of those guys that baits quarterbacks in zone coverage when you know you have help over the top. He's pretty confident in whether you want to call it risk-taking or not and trying to bait a quarterback, but he's good at that. He's a hitter. He hits hard, and on top of that is a very sure tackler. Another guy with great hands when the ball's in the air. Another guy that's great with when the ball's hitting the wide receiver or in the wide receiver's hands, being able to rip the ball loose or jar it loose. And really, I feel like when his eyes aren't on the quarterback and he's chasing, a receiver downfield, he's got great instincts to turn his head at the right time. He reads. Yep. It seems like, and you can't obviously see, but you just can tell when that wide receiver's eyes start to get big. Turn your head! Turn your head! Turn your head! And he's good at that. Real good at that.
Yeah, I'd say that when we get down to these next two guys, I think they have a noticeable flaw. Each one of them have a noticeable flaw in their game, whereas Trayvon Diggs and C.J. Henderson I look at as guys that have some flaws probably, but they can be corrected. There's enough overall talent there. I want to go back to what I was saying before. Christian Fulton is kind of interesting in the sense that he was the man coming in, widely thought as their best corner, even though Stingley comes in with a lot of hype. But you saw throughout the year, teams really started to move away from him. As good as that says that Stingley is, that also kind of opens up some things with Fulton and maybe some of his game. You talked about him turning his head, but one of the things that I think he's going to struggle with is I noticed that guys could get away from him. And I'm talking about I watched Jerry Jeudy, and granted, these are elite levels.
Contact thing that I was talking about. The one guy keeping not PI, but keeping a hand maybe on that receiver because his eyes do stay focused on the quarterback. That you can lose a receiver if you don't have good contact.
Yeah, I don't see him. He's not going to be a one-on-one corner that's going to be able to play with somebody because I think guys can move past him. He has a tendency, I think, to get lost. Well, he's got some. What do you call it? Like straight line speed, but not necessarily in the NFL and really in college athletics too as well. You got guys, especially guys that can run really clean routes and make moves. Like his recovery it's not exceptional in my mind. I've seen him get run away from. So I think that's an area where, but he can be big and physical. And again, if you're talking about playing in a zone concept or short area routes, he may be better suited there. But he, that's going to probably be the challenge. I kind of look at him as more of like a, maybe your number two corner probably on the high end to maybe even like a backup, a guy that comes in. I don't really know that he's got the right moves to handle the slot. So I just think I think this is kind of where, unless he can make some major moves there, I think there's enough of a flaw that it might make him maybe not a long-term answer at one of the starting corner spots.
Okay. All right. Let's move on to our fourth and final guy in these top four, and that is a redshirt junior from Hammond, Louisiana. Got away from LSU, especially with all the D-backs, but they have some guys. Again, a redshirt junior, Mr. Cameron Dantzler from Mississippi State. The Bulldogs, 6'2", $188. Little on the light side, but tall. 30 and 5/8 arms, 9-inch hands. Ran a 4.64 at the combine. A couple things to note. This guy played under Terrell Buckley. That's a name you know.
I do.
Mr. Florida State.
There was talk about bringing him in this year. We did not, though.
He redshirted the 2016 season. And then when he finally got in, he had his first pick of his collegiate career was against Lamar Jackson.
Lamar threw a few picks in college.
He did. But that's kind of a good.
A little different in the NFL.
That was in a bowl game.
Yep.
Let's see. He missed 3 mid-season games this past year due to an injury, and then ended up sitting out the team's bowl game to prepare for the draft. Some notes on him. He too is a good tackler, especially in the open field. He's a good open field tackler. He reads the ball well and he, with his eyes, and he takes great angles. Again, open field tackler, which is what you need out of a corner. He covers I think, fairly well. And he, too, is a really good blitzer off the edge. When he was called upon to blitz, when you're calling on a corner to blitz, he has got to get there.
Yep.
And he was really good at that. One thing that I did notice in some of his tape that, you just got to clean up a little bit, he can be a little handsy on his wide receivers. Okay, and
Watch out, ladies.
I'm not talking about that thing. I'm saying like contact. I'm talking about he's leaning more towards pass interference calls.
Yep.
The way he gets a little handsy with his receivers.
Yeah, like here's the thing I noticed about this guy. This guy's like a piece of spaghetti. Kind of when you look at him, he looks like a piece of spaghetti. In the sense that
piece of spaghetti.
Remember what I was saying? I was saying, you want to hit that like 6 foot, preferably 6'1", a little bit over 200 pounds would be kind of the ideal for some of that big press coverage, but more like less press coverage, more physical. This guy's 6'2". He's one of the taller ones, but he's only a $188, and he looks it. Now the great part with him is he can run with you. So the question's going to be how physical of a game can he play? He actually, kind of the opposite of Fulton, has the ability to run guys down. I do get a little bit concerned, like in run support, when you're that. I mean, I don't want to say little, but when you're that thin, the wear and tear of it. But again, they're not going to pay this guy to do that. I also look at the fact that, again, we're not talking about some, monumentally strong front that he was playing against. And this guy,
a lot on his shoulders back
yeah,
then.
and he had to go up against all the big boys this year, and I think he had a pretty solid year. His 40 wasn't huge, but there's, again, and this is probably the most important position when it comes to this, maybe number 2 behind running back, but is, straight line speed versus game speed. This is a kid, when I've seen some of his work, has some game speed to him and can move. He can turn. He's a little bit more fluid. I do think he can play press coverage. It's just the question is going to be how physical he can be, I think, in the run game, and how much can he move receivers off their routes as opposed to always having to run with them and stay with them. But I will say this too. This is a guy, how I really kind of started looking at him a little bit more was, and admit, shocker here, because the Bears were talking about him. His name came up, so I started looking because this guy seems to be moving up the draft board. So I think the people are liking it. The question is, can he throw on a little bit more weight just to handle the rigors of the NFL and still remain functional? That I don't know. But, I think this he's got some interesting things to work with. A little bit more raw, definitely more raw than a Diggs and a Henderson. But, there are people giving him some pretty good comps and saying that, with the right type of coaching, he could really do something to be a starter. Whereas opposed to, I think this guy's a lot less maxed out than Fulton. He does have some holes in his game, but he's a lot less maxed out. Like, to me, Fulton might be more maxed out in his skill set.
Okay. All right. Well, that'll take us through the top 4 cornerbacks for this 2020 NFL draft. Out of the Southeastern Conference, again, C.J. Henderson, University of Florida, Trayvon Diggs, Bama, Christian Fulton, LSU, Cameron Dantzler, Mississippi State. For all intents and purposes, the top 2 should be in the first round. Fulton, Dantzler, maybe 2, maybe 3. I don't expect either of these guys to go beyond 3, though. So we will dice and slice this one. We'll jump back on. We're going to talk about couple other cornerbacks of note in the SEC, and then drop 3 more names on top of it of guys that are also eligible in the SEC at cornerback. Yeah, we'll see you real soon on the Gridiron. Woo!